Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred. Thank you for joining me. In today's video, I am going to talk about 10 arena nukers you may not have thought of. They're all epic rarity, they are all upgrades from the starter champions, and they can all be part of your solution for getting to Gold 5 Arena and staying there. So if you haven't found your Gold 5 Arena nuker yet, stick around. Just a quick reminder, I live stream every Tuesday and Saturday. Tuesdays at 2 p.m. I do free takeovers for my viewers. And then Saturday, my editor, Son, and I take out our lobby accounts for our Noob versus Pro series. We have a lot of fun. Consider joining us for one of our streams. Also, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider joining our Discord community. Now, when the conversation turns to epic rarity nukers in the community, typically the discussion is going to focus on 3 champions. The first is Genbo the Dishonored in the Shadowkin faction. The second is going to be Skullcrown in the Knights Revenant faction. And the third is going to be Magnar in the Demon Spawn faction. Those are all fantastic epic nukers, and if you've gotten one of those, you're probably all set for Arena. But what happens if you don't pull one of those 3? Do you have to wait around for a legendary to be your nuker, your Gold 5 nuker? Or are there other epics who can step in the place of those 3 champions and do the job well? And the answer is there are a bunch. In fact, I put together a list of 10 today, but I actually had to cut several off the list because if I go over 10, the video just gets too long. But there are probably a good 15 to 20 epic nukers out there who can get you to Gold 5 and keep you there. Now, the 10 I've chosen are in no particular order, but they all do the job a little bit differently. Each one is unique, and that's why I included them on this list. Okay, the first of our champions is the Void Epic Lua from the Dark Elves faction. Now, she has a very high base attack, and that's going to be great. Her multipliers are good, but that base attack is going to make it really easy to build her into an extremely hard-hitting champion. Her main AoE is this A2 that attacks all enemies 3 times. Each critical hit also heals her. You don't really care about the heal that much. You're trying to nuke out the enemy in one go. In addition, she has this A3 that attacks only one enemy, decreases the target's turn meter by 100%, and will ignore shield and block damage buffs. So this can be very useful if you either need to pick off one target who, say, has a shield or a block damage buff, or sometimes you can mess up the enemy's rotation by simply taking away 100% turn meter of one of their champions. One of the nice things about having a Void Affinity nuker is you don't have to worry about weak hits. And so Lua is going to be very predictable, very consistent, and that can be exactly what you want for your Gold 5 Arena nuker. Our second nuker on the list is Neorio. He is a magic affinity epic from the Shadowkin faction, and he has pretty good attack stats, not quite as good as Lua's. And he is affinity, so you have to watch out for weak hits. But his A3 hits pretty hard. It attacks all enemies. It also decreases the cooldown of this skill by 1 turn when attacking under an increased attack buff. In fact, he's got a lot of passives or additional characteristics of his skills that are based on increased attack buffs, so you want to make sure that you've got an increased attack buff for this champion. His A2 is also a single target nuke that can place a block buffs debuff for 2 turns, but typically you're trying to kill the enemy, not hurt them and place a block buffs on them. However, he does have this secondary effect, which is if this champion is under an increased attack buff, steals all buffs from the target enemy before attacking. So if the enemy has some good buffs or you just want to remove them, this can do that. It does require accuracy, so that's something to consider. But sometimes you don't need a lot of accuracy in Arena, especially if you're targeting a nuker on the other team, because they're probably not built with much resistance. Overall, I think Neorio is an interesting Arena nuker. I've never actually built one out myself, but I was just hearing from a Discord community member today that he uses Neorio as his main Arena nuker and does really well. The third champion on our list is a Force Affinity epic from the Dark Elves faction named Darelle. Now, I don't think Darelle's been in the game all that long. I could be wrong, but I collected my first one only maybe a month ago. But he's definitely got a great kit for an Arena nuker. His A2 attacks all enemies and will ignore 15% of each target's defense. This also fills this champion's turn meter by 10% on each critical hit, potentially getting you 40% additional turn meter after this ability goes off. Now, the multipliers on this A2 are quite good, but what really pushes it into a hard-hitting skill is that ignore 15% of each target's defense. That means if you do throw Helm Smasher on there, you can get even more ignore defense potentially, or you could use a different capstone mastery if you wanted to create some more versatility in his build or some more consistency. One of the really nice things about any Force Affinity nuker is a lot of the nukers in the game, especially all the starter champs, are magic affinity, so he's going to be strong hitting into a lot of those champions. Here we have another Force Affinity champion, which is Maeve. Now, Maeve is an old school barbarian epic. She's got pretty good attack, pretty good speed, and she's got a great kit for sniping one enemy target in arena. So her big hit is this A3, which hits extremely hard. It attacks one enemy, and enemies killed by this skill cannot be revived. So you can use Maeve to snipe out the nuker on the enemy team, and then there's no way that nuker can come back, and that's going to give you a lot more time to complete the job. It's not as fast as an AoE damage dealer, but it's a little bit more versatile in some ways because you really don't have to worry about reviver teams very much. And like I said, this skill hits extremely hard. She also has an A2, which hits very hard. So when the A3 is on cooldown, you've still got this single hitter that can place a stun debuff for one turn. If you want to use the stun, you're going to have to include a little bit of accuracy in her build. Sometimes you don't get that AoE nuker you want, but you can get a really good single target nuker, and Maeve fits the bill. Okay, now we've got our one and only Spirit Affinity nuker in Morag Bronzelock. She is an epic from the Dwarven faction. I really like this champion. She doesn't have to be an arena nuker. She can be a PvE nuker. She can be a support champion. She's got a great all-around kit. She's also our first defensive-based nuker. Now, her big hitter is her A2, which is an AoE that also places a 25% strengthen buff on all allies for 2 turns. Remember, she's a defense-based champion, so she's going to do damage based on defense, but more defense is also going to make her tankier. So if you don't nuke out the entire wave here, now you've got a nice strengthened buff to make sure that you can survive for extra rounds. One of the really nice things about Morag Bronzelock is this A3, which allows her to also be a sniper. This is a single target attack, but it is a ally attack with 2 other champions. Now her A1 hits decently hard, but if your 3 champions can kill the enemy with this ally attack, not only have you removed a threat from the board, but you're going to get Morag an extra turn. And that's going to let you then maybe use the A2 if you haven't used it already. Make sure to pick a squishy target for this A3 because this is only 2 random allies, so there's a decent chance that you're not bringing another heavy hitter. And so Morag is going to have to do the lion's share of the damage to kill your target. She also has this counter attack while under a strengthen buff. So if she does use her A2 and gets the strengthen buff, then chances are when she's hit, not only will she survive, but she'll counterattack the champions that hit her, potentially knocking them out of the fight. Her A1 is also really nice because not only is it a double hitter that hits pretty hard, but it ignores shield buffs. This is actually a fairly rare skill. There are some other champions who have that, but anytime you can ignore shield buffs, especially in the current meta where we see a lot of bolster sets, you've got an opportunity of really reducing or at least circumventing the defensive power of the teams you come up against. Okay, for our 6th champion, I'm choosing a champion that I actually know that every single player in the game will get. She's our only guaranteed champion, and that is Dark Elhan of the Undead Hordes. I believe you get her as a login reward at 120 days, could be 150 days, but that means everybody will get her at some point. Now, if you don't have your arena nuker solution by the time you get to Dark Elhan, she is a very good option. She also brings a little bit of added flexibility to your arena roster because she is self-buffing. Decent attack, decent speed, tiny bit on the slow side. That's not a huge deal for your arena nuker. You just want to make sure she's speed-tuned. But her A2 places an increased attack buff on herself. It's the large increased attack buff, and then it attacks all enemies. It also has a chance of placing the decreased speed debuff for 2 turns, but again, we're not too worried about that. If you want to use this in wave content, you can put some accuracy into her build. But for the arena, basically you just want to nuke really hard, and this skill does that. Out of all of the AoE nukes on this list, this is near the bottom in terms of overall damage. It's not bad damage, and because it brings an increased attack buff, this may free up a spot in your arena team composition. So if you're having trouble finding a turn meter filler who is also an increased attack champion like Seeker or Runekeeper Dazdurk or Arbiter, then you can just go for a plain turn meter filler like Apothecary. If you had Deacon Armstrong for your drop defense, you have Apothecary as your second turn meter fill, and then Dark Elhan has the increased attack. You can still keep Wukong there as your buff stripper, and those 4 champions will do really well for you. They bring everything you need, And Dark Elhan can get you to gold 5 and keep you there. Dark Elhan also has these 2 really good passives that are usable in specific circumstances in the arena. For Veins of Ice, she instantly removes any freeze debuffs that get placed on her. When she does that, she gets an increased crit rate buff and an increased crit damage buff, plus a strengthen buff. But this means she's going to hit even harder. And then her first passive is fills this champion's turn meter by 25% and instantly activates the Death Majesty skill whenever this champion or an ally receives a freeze debuff. So this is her nuke. This is her A2. So if you're coming up against a Tormund the Cold defensive team, Dark Elhan is actually going to do extra damage because she's going to potentially fire this Death's Majesty twice. Now, the Veins of Ice passive is on a 1-turn cooldown, and the Lethal Winter passive is also on a 1-turn cooldown, so she can't do this more than once per turn. But you typically won't need it more than once because by itself, the A2 is going to hit very hard. And then if you get a second chance to hit with that A2, you're probably going to nuke your enemy off the board. Very good arena solution, really flexible, and is a great Tormund solution and allows you to take on those Tormund teams that a lot of other Go First teams have to avoid. Now we come to my personal favorite on the list. This is a new discovery for me, or was as of about a month ago. I think he was introduced to the game not too long ago, and that is Elhan the Golden. He's another Void epic. It's always great to have a Void nuker, and he is in the High Elves faction. Now his stats are solid, but he's got a great kit. The first thing you're going to want to do is open up with his A3, which places an increased crit damage buff on this champion for 3 turns. That's on a 4-turn cooldown if you need it in PvE, say. It also places a 50% increased accuracy buff on this champion for 2 turns, and then it grants an extra turn. Now that increased accuracy buff is actually going to play, which is rare for an arena nuker. And that's because this A2 is the AoE that attacks 2 times. It has a good multiplier, but with that extra 30% crit damage, it's going to hit very hard. But the first hit has a 100% chance when booked of placing a block active skills debuff for 2 turns. And the second hit has a 100% chance of placing a True Fear debuff for 1 turn if the enemies are not under a block active skills debuff. So if you happen to miss or get the 3% resist on the first skill, you can still land the True Fear. So you actually get 2 chances to disrupt your enemy team. And that's on top of the 1 chance you have to potentially just nuke them out. Now, this is where that increased accuracy will come into play, because all you need is a little bit of accuracy to make sure that you can land some of these debuffs. And again, like I said, this hits very hard. You're not going to weak hit. So again, unless you get that 3% resist, you don't have to worry about weak hits for damage. You don't have to worry about weak hits for the debuffs. He also has this extra passive, which is really nice. Ignores 10% of defense when attacking support, defense, and HP champions. So he can be really good going into a defensive-based team with a defensive nuker or an HP nuker like Magnar. And that's just going to do a little bit of extra work against all of the other members of the team who are not the nuker if the enemy has an attack-based nuker. Really cool champion. I like his aesthetic. I like his kit. I think he's interesting, and he's definitely worth building out. Our 8th champion here is near and dear to my heart because this was my very first arena nuker. And this is Padma. She is a Void epic from the Demon Spawn faction. Now, this is just our second defensive-based nuker on the list. She's got good base speed, good base defense. She doesn't have the 10% extra crit damage, so you're going to have to make sure that you get enough crit damage into her kit. But her A2 attacks all enemies and has a 50% chance when booked of placing a decreased accuracy debuff for 2 turns. You can see that the damage is based on defense and attack. The defense is the bigger number, so you really want to focus on building her with as much defense as possible. But the great news about Padma and this nuke is that the attack stat that you have, if you have it in substats, if you have like flat attack on your weapon, none of that attack gets wasted. It still gets utilized. That just makes her a little bit easier to build. It makes you a little bit less concerned about potential bad substat rolls on your gear. Now, I would say this AoE is a slightly below average for the AoEs on this list. Again, it hits decently hard. She wouldn't be on the list if she didn't. But because she's a defensive-based nuker, you can build her very tanky, potentially on a go second team. You're going to get a lot of opportunities to get extra turns. Her A3 does hit extremely hard. This attacks only 1 champion, but it also removes all buffs from the target and places them on this champion. So it is a buff steal. The multipliers on this are very good. You can see the damage here is based only on defense. So this can be a great single target nuke where you can just assassinate somebody on the other team. And if you have enough accuracy, it can also be a great buff strip So even if you don't kill the champion, you can potentially remove the things that are keeping them alive, like a block damage buff, or maybe a strengthen buff or a shield. I always find it fun when you steal a really big shield and all of a sudden your arena nuker now has a really big shield instead. Her A1 is also one of the most reliable AoE decrease attacks in the game. This is going to need crit rate to land that decrease attack, and obviously you also need accuracy. But remember, she is a Void Affinity champion, so no worries with weak hits. Padma's an old school champion. I still love her. I think she's great in Arena. She's great in PvE as well. Okay, back to the Barbarians faction. And no, this is not the same champion. This is another Force Affinity Barbarian epic that carries a bow and has a hat and looks like that. So same character model as Maeve, but completely different champion. Good base attack stats, good base speed, gets the extra % crit damage. Now, Alica has this A3 that attacks all enemies and has a 100% chance of increasing the cooldowns of all enemy skills by 2 turns. Now, this skill hits decently hard and can definitely be a knock 'em down nuke, or you can also build her with enough accuracy to make her a lockout champion. So whether you're using her to nuke, or you're using her to increase the cooldowns of enemy skills, or you want to try to do both, this is an extremely powerful skill that's going to provide a lot of versatility in the arena. Her A2 also hits extremely hard. It is only a solo target attack, but it will ignore 50% of the target's defense if their max HP is higher than this champion's max HP. That's likely to be true in most cases, except maybe for the enemy nuker, if it's an attack-based champion. So you do have to watch out that you don't waste this on a really squishy target who doesn't have more HP than Alica. But if the target has more HP than Alica, she is going to crush with this skill, especially for a defensive-based champion, because she's ignoring 50% of that defense, and they probably don't have as much HP as an HP-based champion would. The biggest downside to Alica is the number of books that you need for her. If you can just get all of your books, you need 7 books in the A3. If you can just get the books there, that's probably enough. If you also want the A2 nuke, though, you need another 6 books over here. And then, of course, there are 7 books in the A1. This is an insane number of books. I hope that in some distant point of the future, they go and say, hey, Alica, we're going to give you a little bit of a rework, and we're going to take some of those books away from you without reducing her power overall. But if you have a lot of epic tomes sitting around and you still don't have a good arena solution, or you just want a good lockout champion, Alica can do the job. And now for our poster girl, Gala Long Braids. She is our 10th and final epic on this list. She comes from the Dwarven faction, and this is an amazing nuker. She does it a little bit differently than anybody on the list, but everybody on the list does it a little bit differently than each other. In this case, Gala is an attack-based nuker, but she's a single target nuker. And what you want to do is open up with this A3. It's going to attack an enemy 3 times. Each hit will ignore 25% of the target's defense, and then grants an extra turn if this champion has full HP after using this skill. So as long as she's on a go first team and you don't have some weird reflect damage passive, she's always going to have full HP after using this skill. So if you want, you can knock down an important support, get them within striking range of the next skill, or you can just nuke out the enemy squishies and then get your extra turn and go again. On your second turn, you're probably going to be using the A2 here. This will ignore 50% of the target's defense if Gala is under a shield buff. Now, that's not always going to be the case if you're on a go first team, but if you're running Gala, you want to try to find a way to get a shield onto her. There are a couple of easy ways. You could just use a divine offense set, like a divine set, or make sure that one of the allies on the team has a shield set or a bolster set. But there are several ways to get this shield onto her before she goes. And if she does, she's going to ignore 50% of the target's defense. So her A3 is probably going to nuke somebody out. Her A2 is probably going to nuke somebody out. And then all of a sudden the enemy team's in disarray, in shambles, and you can really just wait till the next turn to kill them off. Her A1 attacks 2 times. This also ignores defense. In this case, it's 30% of the target's defense. And this will place a shield buff on her for 2 turns, which is equal to 20% of the damage inflicted. Which means if she gets back around to her A2, even if the shield buff has worn off from, say, the bolster set that you started with, she's going to have another opportunity to get a shield onto her, and therefore ignore defense on the A2 the second time around. Because Gala is Void Affinity, you don't have to worry about weak hitting, so she's always going to hit nice and hard against every target. And she's really good at both sniping out single targets that you really want to remove off the board, high value targets on the enemy team. She's also great against supports and defensive based champions because of that ignored defense. This is one of those champions that's still used in very high level arena. There aren't too many epics that play in platinum, and Gala is one of them. Okay, that is it. Those are our 10 arena nukers. All of them can get you to gold 5 and then keep you there. Remember that you have to consider the team you put around these nukers. It's not just the nukers themselves who have to do the job. And the nuker you choose has to fit the team composition you build around them. Also consider their builds and consider the enemies that they're going to be good and weak against. So some of these champions are good for a go second team. Some will only work on a go first team. Some will be countered by specific champions on the enemy team. And some will counter enemies that you see commonly in arena. If you happen to use any of these champions, please let me know in the comments below and tell me how you build them and what kind of composition you use in them. And then also tell me, did they get you to gold 5 arena? Have they kept you there? Or are you still on your way and climbing up? I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for hanging out. I've been Colred, and I will see you in another video soon.